Hello everyone, welcome to the M&A Case of the Week series. I am Snigdha Agarwal and I have with me Richa, Bhatia today, and we'll be going through the case for you.
Hi Snigdha, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
I'm good as well. Okay, are you ready for the case?
Yes.
Okay, so your problem statement is your client is a PE firm. They plan to purchase the chain of Phoenix shopping malls in India. So you need to figure out how they should go about it.
Okay. Thank you so much for that. So I would just want to repeat the problem statement to see I've captured it well. So our client is a PE private equity firm, and they're looking for investing in the purchase of the Phoenix malls in the country, and we want to do a valuation for them to see if this is a lucrative option for them to invest in.
Yes.
Perfect. So before I dive deep, can I just take a few minutes and arrange my thoughts on this?
Sure.
Perfect. So I would like to structure this in three major brackets. So first, I would want to understand the portfolio of the client and the investment objective. Then I would want to move on to some basic information about our target, which is the Phoenix malls. And finally, I would want to deep dive into the detailed due diligence to understand if this is a lucrative opportunity for them. Does that sound like a good structure?
Yeah, sounds good.
Perfect. So starting off, could you just tell me a bit more about the existing portfolio of the client and what is the investment objective?
Yeah, sure. So our client has a mixed portfolio of different investments in different kind of industries, but this would be the first investment they're looking at in terms of the real estate industry. They're planning to enter this industry and acquire it because potentially they feel that this is a good match for their portfolio and generate revenues. They plan to exit in the next 8 to 10 years, so that is something they can consider as an investment objective.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much for that. So next, I would like to understand some things about the malls in terms of where are these malls majorly located? Are we looking at tier 1 or tier 2 cities? What is the age of these malls, size of these malls, and the kind of tenants that they currently hold?
Okay, sure. There are all in all, there are 14 malls which are present in tier one cities at premium locations. If you look, consider the size of the malls, they are average size if you compare them to the industry average, and they are around 5 to 10 years old. In terms of what they have inside them, so you can expect like a mix of normal retail shops, anchor shops, and luxury shops as well.
Okay, perfect. So my understanding is that they are majorly located in tier 1 cities with a good size compared to the industry and also containing a mix of all kind of shops from premium economy to luxury kind of stores. Great. So now I want to detail my due diligence, how I want to go about the entire process of conducting this. Sorry, we'll have to pause this. I'm not being able to scroll.
Um,
Okay, thank you for that. So now I would want to move on to how I would want to conduct the entire due diligence. Can I just take a minute here to structure my thoughts?
sure.
Perfect. So I would want to actually start off by understanding the attractiveness of the industry in which our client is planning to enter. Once we establish that, I would want to move on to the asset attractiveness. Here, I would want to essentially see three main things. That would be the commercial due diligence, a financial due diligence, legal, and lastly, managerial due diligence. Once that is done, I would move on to the deal specifics. Here, essentially, I would be looking at valuation and financial constraints for our client. Finally, moving on to key risks of this particular investment. Does this sound like a good structure?
Yeah, sounds good.
Perfect. So starting off with the industry attractiveness, I would want to understand two main things. First would be the market size and if the market is substantial enough for a client to enter. And second would be any growth opportunities plus constraints in growth for our particular client.
Okay.
In terms of the market, so I would actually want to break down into what real estate market we are looking at. So the real estate market is essentially broken into two, which would be commercial and as well as residential. We are essentially going to be focusing on commercial, and within that also we will only be looking at rental space. So in the rental space, do we have any information about the market size, or can I assume that the market is big enough for a client to enter into?
Yeah, so the only information we have about the industry right now is the market is very attractive and the macroeconomic factors which are there are also showing like a positive sign. So there's ample amount of growth available in the market.
Okay, perfect. So now that we know that the market is attractive, I would want to understand what is the future growth prospects for our particular client. So in terms of growth, I would actually want to look at it from two sides, supply side and demand side. So in the supply side, I think the growth factors would be what are the new malls that are being added each and every year, and also what is the average occupancy rate of these malls. Whereas in the demand side, I would be focusing on what is the footfall that these malls are seeing on an average. Do you think this captures all the information that we would need, or do you think we would also want to look at more factors?
Yeah, I think these factors are nice. So giving you some information about them. So like you mentioned on the supply side, so the average vacancy which is there in the malls has decreased. That's positive sign. On also new mall additions are slow right now. If you look from a demand perspective, there's an increase in adoption. So there's an increase in footfall if you look at from a demand perspective.
Perfect. So this essentially shows this is a lucrative opportunity because we can see that the demand for these malls are actually greater than the supply. So there is some leeway for the firm to enter and capture on this excess demand which is there in the market. So I think overall in terms of industry, what we can understand is that the market size is attractive. It is big enough for the client, and also in terms of the growth, because demand exceeds supply, there is opportunity to grow and also capture substantial part of this market. Do you
Yes.
think it would be enough for the industry attractiveness, and should we move on to assets after this?
Yeah, I think we can move on to the assets.
Okay, perfect. So now moving on to the assets, like I mentioned, I would be looking at four major things: commercial, financial, legal, and management. These are the four major areas I would want to consider to understand how attractive this asset is. Is there any particular one you would want me to focus on?
I think these are the good factors you're looking at, but for now, I think we can focus on the financial aspect of the asset.
Okay, so when we're focusing on financial, there are quite a few financial figures that we can look at, but I think I would want to start off with profitability. So in terms of profitability, what we will essentially need is understanding their revenues and the cost. So if you think this is a good approach, can I just take a minute to lay this down?
Yeah, sure.
Perfect. So starting off with the revenue part of it, I would look at it in two major brackets. So the first major revenue would be the rental income that the mall earns from the shops which are there in the mall itself. And secondly, there would be some ancillary income in terms of parking revenue that they incur, or any other such ancillary things, which I would essentially consider as a overall percentage of rental income, since they do not form a very large chunk of the income. So rental income, then I would actually want to look at it in the form of a formula to capture all the different elements. So I would want to start off with the total mall size. Then I would consider the percentage of that mall which is actually leased. Then further multiplying that with the percentage which is actually occupied, and finally multiplying that with the rent per square feet per month that the mall earns from these particular rental agreements. So do you think that adequately captures our rental income?
Yeah, that sounds comprehensive.
Perfect. So to understand these things, do you think we have any kind of information on the lease, the percentage of the mall that is leased, and the occupancy rates? Further, I would also want to understand these factors by benchmarking it to the industry and the competitors, and also seeing what are the past trends to see if we have improved on these factors.
I think this seems like a comprehensive formula, and we do not have more details on this. So I think we can move on to the next part.
Okay, perfect. Great. So the next essential part would be in rental itself. I would also want to consider two major things, which is essentially what are the kind of clients, or what are the kind of shops do we actually have, and what is the churn rate and the stickiness of these particular shops so that we can understand if they would essentially stick with us in the future or if there's a high churn rate?
Okay, so the mall has 90% sticky rate for tenants, like if you consider Shoppers Stop, H&M, Inox, and all of those.
Okay.
And if you look at other tenants, they have like 10% unsticky tenants, which would be like local retail shops. So they have a higher churn rate.
Okay, so essentially we can see that a major bulk of our rent that we get is from sticky clients, which are the larger clients. So hence this seems like the revenue that we get from rents is essentially more stable in nature. So
Yes.
once we've established this, I would want to move on to the costs aspect of it.
Yeah, sure.
Perfect. So essentially under costs, I would consider 2 to 3 different buckets. So the first would be the employee cost for all the employees that we engage for cleaning and other security maintenance in the mall. Second would be depreciation cost, because the capital expenditure of the physical asset, which is the mall, is a major cost item for us. Third would be any kind of insurance costs that we have incurred. And lastly, there would be any other form of maintenance cost, which is going to be included in the cost that we are incurring. So I think these are the 4 major brackets of cost that we will be looking at. Do you want me to dive deeper into the past trends in benchmarking with industries and competitors?
No, I think this is enough for now. I think you've covered all the aspects of the cost itself. So you can move on to the next thing you want to analyze.
Perfect. So I think the next thing that I would want to look at is essentially trying to focus deeper into the deal itself and understanding what are the specifics of the deal. So here there are 2 major things I would want to understand. One is the valuation of the deal, and second is the financial constraints of the client in actually meeting that valuation. So would you want me to deep dive into any of these in particular?
I think for the purposes of this case, you can move on. So we do not have a lot of information on the financial constraints. The client doesn't have a lot of expectations in mind for now. So we can move on to the next thing.
Great. So the last thing in my essential framework would be understanding the risks that the client will face if they go ahead with this investment. So could I just take a minute here to lay these down? Perfect. So I think there are 3 major risk heads that I could think of right now. Firstly would be technological risk. So we see that there's been a surge in online shopping and e-commerce, which is essentially a direct competitor to the physical mall that we would be investing in. So that would essentially hamper our demand and also restrict the kind of revenue that we can raise. Second would be financial risk. So since this is such a capital intensive investment for our client, they would essentially be leveraging it with debt as well. So meeting those debt obligations would require a continuous flow of income and stream of revenue that they can be generated from this. This would essentially have to be captured in the financial risks. Third, there would be regulatory risks in terms of if there's any change in government regulations and legal requirements requiring the mall to either change the way they operate or essentially change any kind of systems in which they're maintaining the mall. So this will essentially be 3 major risk heads. Would you want me to look at further, or would this suffice?
Is there any particular risk you want to look at out of these 3, or do you think you're missing any one important risk?
I think one other risk that could impact would be competitors. So we have considered that. So in that would be if there's any other mall which opens up quite close to the mall we are investing in, or a bigger mall that opens up, that could essentially again hamper the kind of demand or the footfall that we would get in our mall.
Yeah, I think that's the risk I was looking for. So, what do you think would be the major risk out of these 4 for this particular asset?
So I think the major risks for this particular asset would be technological risk and competitors risk. I am not considering financial risk to be a major risk because we see that the client, the PE fund, is a mature client with a mixed portfolio. So there would be hedging opportunities for them to actually cover up some of the losses they make in this particular investment with other investments per se. So hence I think technological and competitors risk would be the major risk standing out for the client.
Yes. Okay. Okay, so now that you've looked at these 4 different factors you're looking at, can you summarize the case for me and what is your final recommendation to our?
Definitely. So we were looking at an investment opportunity in Phoenix Malls for our client, which is a private equity firm. We started off by seeing the attractiveness of the industry, and we established that the market size is lucrative, and so is the growth in terms of higher demand and lesser supply. So it is a lucrative market to enter. Secondly, in terms of the assets attractiveness, we specifically looked at the financials in terms of the revenues and the cost. And again, we determined that the revenues were steadily increasing with 90% sticky shops. Lastly, we moved on to the risks, and we uncovered that the major risk for technology and competitors, which could essentially be contained by our client. So, looking at it overall, it seems like a good opportunity for the PE fund to invest in, and it would reap benefits for them in the future.
Okay, perfect. We can close the case now.
Thank you so much.
Coming to the feedback of the case, first we'll talk about the positives of the case solution. The candidate clarified the problem statement perfectly and asked for any inputs from the interviewer itself. Secondly, she took time to structure her thoughts as and when needed and took time to come back with the solution. Third, she explained the structure, what she plans to follow during the course of the interview, and that confirmed that from the interviewer itself, if that makes sense. Fourth, she followed a good MECE structure in terms of breaking it down in industry, risk, deal specifics. And lastly, she also suggested revenue benchmarking with the industry while solving for the economic side of the deal. Coming to a few areas of improvement, she missed highlighting the competitive risk but was quick to get back to it once the interviewer asked for the input. Secondly, she could add more inputs in the industry using her real life knowledge in terms of what exactly is going on in the real estate industry. Thirdly, in longer cases like M&A or due diligence, a recap is usually preferred so that the interviewer knows the progress of the case till then and does not lose interest in the case. And lastly, she could also mention some other constraints to be kept in mind while she was mentioning the recommendations. Any constraint which could make sure that the deal is good for the company and the client.